Okay, good. So I think that takes us to the first of our softwares, which is Excel today. That's the first one. So as many of you will know, Excel is one of the most broadly used pieces of software that we have, but equally, sometimes one of the most underused tools. So Samir and Michael are now going to give us some great tips on Excel and why we should continue to learn and develop with Excel. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Making Excel Work for You. Okay, so we'll just do a little bit of a brief introduction to ourselves. So I'm Mike Barnes, I'm the costing accountant at the Christie NHS Foundation Trust. My past roles have been a little bit of income, a little bit of management accounts, a little bit of CIP, but mainly costing. I was certainly not an advanced Excel user when I started in the NHS. It's all come through worked in learned experience, working with fantastic people that have taught me so much, and hopefully using this forum to give back a little bit. And I typically use Excel in some weird cases. So I like to use a lot of VBA macros. I don't like to use my keyboard if I can help it. I unfortunately am one of those people that like to use Excel as a database, which it's obviously not. But I've learned some good skills and I'd like to hopefully share them with yourselves. And over to Samir.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Samir Rada. I'm the systems accountant at Bolton NHS Foundation Trust. I too have worked in costing and management accounts and came from outside the NHS doing accounts payable and accounts receivable. I've learned Excel on the job. Me and Mike were just talking the other day about my first interview at the NHS and how I walked away from that, just asking the guy who had set the test up, saying how I was like, I didn't know what an Excel table was at that particular moment. And from then on, I've just learned from other people and learned from the internet of many things of what I want to get out of Excel. I enjoy making sure that my spreadsheets are performing as fast as they possibly could, and that they are as dynamic and fit for purpose as possible too. So what I'm going to go through is just an overview of what our channel is like. So within Teams, what Megan showed you just earlier, it is a place to ask any Excel questions. I believe the first time we did this, we essentially said that we don't want to talk about macros, but I am completely allowing that now. And any sort of talk about Excel is completely welcome. Because we're all there to essentially support one another, and one particular person may have a greater experience of the next, and if you're all part of that group, we can all share that knowledge. Some of the kinds of questions that we've had vary from asking about how to write a particular macro, how to troubleshoot Power Query, how to fix formulas, or even just general understanding of how to come up with solutions for such a thing as budget setting. Within the channel, we are able to just comment on these questions, talk to each other, and even make contact in terms of saying, hey, have you got 5 minutes? We can actually just you can show me what the issue is and we'll sort it out there and then. And we can also share any sort of ideas or any cool or interesting things that we've come across so far as well. Just to reiterate with regards to what you were seeing before, in order to get to the Excel part of the One NHS Finance group, you will be within your own trust, have your own access to Teams, but hopefully you will also get access to the One NHS Finance Teams, and within there once you're signed up to the software skills, you'll see this group of software skills here, and Excel is the one that we're focusing on together now. Within there, within the files section, so if we go over here, you'll see that we have various files that have been set up to contain some of the content that we've already created for it. So as part of the Possible last year, we had another session like this, and we've got a video in there for that. We have over 4 hours of content for what we consider the basics of Excel. We've also got homework in which you can essentially build your own forecast model within Excel. We have problem solving sessions, which are over 3 hours of tips and tricks and things like that, and also some help with regards to some of the homework. And then as of right now and going forward, we've essentially got aftercare, which is any solutions to problems that are being asked on the channel. If we've been involved in them, or if anybody else cares to share it, we share those solutions on the channel as well for anybody to come and pinch, basically. And we've also got future events that are coming up with regards to the focus sessions, which should be happening later on in the year. So what we're going to go through now is the art of the possible. We're going to give you a little flavour of what we can do within Excel. This is just a screenshot that I took from Google, but yeah, we're going to go through an example now, which should give you an idea of what kind of things we can do in Excel, and potentially some things that you may not have seen before. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. Before I share my screen, Roger, is that a legacy hand or is that a question?
Legacy one, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. Right. I'll share my screen now then. Okay. Can I get some nods just to so that you can see the screen?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. So this is going to be our Art of the Possible session. It's looking at a cost and improvement program master list, and I think that this is a good example of the functionality that's available within Excel that possibly you haven't seen before or don't use necessarily very often. The files separate into two different parts. So the first part is almost a data entry for logging any cost improvement saving schemes. But then the second part, which Samir will go through, is the reporting side. And to complicate the mix a little bit, what we've chosen to do is each theoretical division has its own file, so that could theoretically be shared on SharePoint through the divisional triumvirate. So getting straight into it, as I said, it's a data entry file, so it's one big table. With the theory is that you populate from left to right. Because each division might choose to populate in a slightly different way to kind of promote consistency in each individual cell, it has a what to populate. So that's just the data validation message, and then there's calculations as well. So to ensure consistency, the use of drop downs is available. And that's just selecting a list, and they can then select that item that relates to them, and it promotes that consistency. There's some formulas which, to again promote consistency, to prevent subjectivity. The method of RAG rating each individual scheme is done using a RAG rating system of where is the plan up to, but then also what is the risk of delivery, and the triangulation of the two generates a risk score, a risk rating score. So if it's of low development, there's not a plan written up, or it's of high risk, it's likely to be red. Whereas if it's low risk or the plan's been fully approved, it's likely to be green. The file also includes things like groupings, so that going back to that triumvirate access, they might not be interested in the detail of the reference for any environment, any journal, but more specifically whether it has been transacted or not. And if they do ever want to drill down, they can expand it using the plus and minuses. And then going further on to lists, you can also start to include interdependencies. So on this particular line, the scheme is set up as a non-pay, and therefore the options that are available, so just the top options, you've got medicine optimization, procurements. But if I change that to a pay category, then the options that now become available to me are agency, bank, establishment, reviews, things like that. And similarly for income as well. The options are dependent on a prior selection, that left to right kind of population. And again, that's just in the data validation, which many people are familiar with. People don't necessarily know that they can use the source option to write a formula. So in this specific example, I've got 3 options of income, pay, non-pay, and therefore for me, it's appropriate for me to use an if formula. But given the constraints of that text box and the difficulties of clicking around, it might be easier to use, say, an indirect formula and look up to a table to pull back the results. So in the instance of the income being the option, then there would be a specific table related to income, and I could indirect and get the list of possible options. And then finally, just to kind of round off the master list side of this section, you then populate what the planned savings would be for the year, as well as actual/forecasts, including any recurrency for next year, and similarly for hold times. And because it's potentially a one-stop shop for the divisional triumvirate, there's some low-level reporting they could access, which might give headlines of where they're at in terms of their target, what's been identified, what hasn't been identified, the RAG rating of that, and then just some simple visualizations. Now, obviously, this is entirely possible within Excel, but there is a Power BI session later on in this session, and actually some of this could be pushed to Power BI or Tableau or whatever software you're using that might become more interactive and intuitive for the user. So I'm now going to hand over to Samir, who's going to talk about the reporting side of this file. Unfortunately, because of Samir's access, he can't drive the thing. His firewall's blocking him, so you'll have to put up with me being instructed to do something and then doing it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, IT issues then. Right, so one of the important things to note with regards to what was being said then is that particular file has been set up and has been shared across multiple divisions, but in a way that meant that the core content of that file, like the structure of it, for all the divisions using it, was actually really consistent. And that consistency is really quite key in order to gain the most benefit out of consolidating that information. I'm sure that anybody that is tried to consolidate multiple spreadsheets of anybody's before is if they start adding in their own columns or they start to move things about, then the idea of copying and pasting, for instance, from one spreadsheet to the next becomes a little bit more complicated. What we've got here is a spreadsheet which actually does all the consolidation of all of those individual spreadsheets all in one go. It does that using something called Power Query, which is available within Excel, and I would hope and expect that everybody's on a version of Excel that now has that. But obviously, if you're still on using Excel 2010 and possibly 2013, if it's just 2010, you would need to have that downloaded and installed on your computer. I'm going to assume that you've all got it by now and just move forward with that. In order to, what you're seeing right here is a combination of all the different all the data that sits within different files within a particular folder. Mike, if you can just show that particular folder that we're talking about. So you can see here on the computer, there are 4 different spreadsheets which we want to get all of the master file information from. And we can use Excel to actually tell it, I want all the information from this particular table and I want to combine it all at the click of a button. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you that now, like from scratch. So if we open up a new workbook, and if you go to the data tab, and you can see a section called Get Data. Again, depending on the version that you're in within Excel, it may be in a different place. But you can click on From File, and you can click the From Folder button. What that allows us to do is select a particular folder. So in our case, it's the divisional files one. And Excel is basically going to give us all of the information about that particular folder. It's essentially going to say, these are all the files in there. And what we want to do is we want to combine and edit that information. In Office 365, it says combine and transform. In all the versions, it says combine and edit. So if we click on that, and in this particular case of these files themselves, we've got a situation where the data that we actually want is actually locked behind loads of macros and stuff like that. So unfortunately, in this particular case, we can't actually just select a particular sheet or table from it. But Mike, if you just highlight the other divisions or corporate divisions one, those ones there are actually tables that are viewable within the spreadsheet, which clearly don't have anything in. If you click on parameter 1 now and just press OK, Excel will now go ahead and show us all of the contents of all of those spreadsheets together, all in one place. And what we can do then is we can filter that content down to just the data that we want, so that Excel will then essentially save that step, and it will allow us to exit back out into Excel and actually be able to just refresh this, so that we always use those same files to actually produce a consolidated table that's always got the latest information on it once we press refresh. One aspect to that is that essentially all these divisional files that have been shared out can now stay there, and you will be able to get the live information from them whenever you come into this summary spreadsheet and actually just refresh it from there and take your own snapshots of what happens without having to go into those source files. The table that we want in this particular case is table 1. So if we filter on that, and then what we can do is we can expand all of the content of that particular table. Just when you do it, just untick the keep original prefix. So in that button there, next to data, we can click to load all of the columns from the table. Once it's actually loaded, yeah, press OK. And that will then give us all the information from all of those files all in one place. We've got loads of rubbishy lines, so all we're going to do in this particular case is get rid of any nulls. So just untick that and press OK. Just change the thing at the top there to say no equal null rather than equals corporate division. just right over it.
Which bit, sorry?
That's okay. This will do the same thing. Click on them and press OK. That's it. So what I described there is now what Excel has just done. By using the user interface, Excel has actually interpreted that as as in the formula at the top there to say that division is not equal to null. And now we've got all of the data that we want. And if we click close and load 2, what that allows us to do is say, of all the data that we now have, that Excel is now aware of, we can do all these different things. We can just show it all in a table. We can create a pivot table of that particular data. We can just create the connection so that we know it's there to be used later, and so on and so forth. If you just click on, just press OK, then what that will do is it will just load all of the data from those files into here and just show you everything that was in that table for all of the files that were in there. And this can work with hundreds of files. Okay. So we're going to go back to the actual example that we were working with earlier. And if we just edit the 24-25 FY query. What we've got in there is everything is exactly the same as what we did before, up to the word filtered rows. So if you click on the filtered rows step, all those things over to the side there. Oh, click on expanded data and promoted headers maybe. And filtered rows 1. Yeah, that's what we did. Yeah. So these are all the same steps as what we just did. In this particular case, it's the source is a different thing. It's the source is the entire sheet. So there's a few extra filters that are needed, but other than that, it's exactly the same data that we had before. If you click on the just click on the next step where it says removed columns. All we've done additionally to what we did before is we've removed some columns that we didn't particularly want in this summary. So what is happening here is that Excel is saving what you could do with a copy and paste, but saving it in steps so that it remembers all the logic that you've gone through. It remembers all the time, all the ways in which you wanted to filter your data, and it makes sure that all the data is stacked on top of each other quite nicely, as the data was all coming from the same looking sources. If you click close on, click on the divisional files one, sorry. This is exactly the same as the as what we had before, but there's one step further, is that it's actually grouped all the data into various summary levels, so that we've actually got essentially a pivot table like data within a data set itself. If we close this, and if you scroll, and that's the output of that. If you scroll all the way to the right, you can see that we can also add in our own Excel formulas, just as we would do normally. In this particular case, we've used information from a setup sheet. So if you go to that sheet, you can see that we can start to manipulate what the results of those formulas are by having lookups. Lookups are a key part of most Excel projects to be able to have a single source of truth with regards to how what determines particular variables. So in this case, the start month has been selected as month 1. The current month has been selected as month 2, and the next month has been selected as month 3. We can change those and make the formulas change as well, but we'll just leave them as they are. We've got drop downs, as you saw earlier, for the choices of those. If you go back to the detail sheet, you can see we're using formulas in here that you may not have come across. So indirect allows us to get column information without actually knowing what the column is by it constructing the column name out of the variables that we've got. In the next column, we've got I've got the same thing. In the one after that, in the next month, I think it's also the same. Okay, that's fine. So why would we want to consolidate all the information? Well, as you may well be aware, we do lots of reporting, whether it be internal to your own organisation or whether it's external to the likes of NHSI. And one of the sheets that we've got set up here is for PFR, so the provider financial return. And in there, we have the outputs that are ready to essentially copy and paste straight into that the relevant areas within the PFR. So we've got our pay, non-pay, and income split of CIP. We've got our year-to-date values and our full-year forecasts, all coming from those source files. And we can make high-level adjustments in here if we wanted to, if a particular value was needing to be adjusted. But generally speaking, we've got all of the areas in which we want to report on straight into here, and it's an easy view and copy and paste away from finishing that sheet. Is there anything more from that?
No. We'll just, sorry.
Is there anything in the PFR data source bit, or is that
exactly the same as yeah, just the refined version? Yeah.
So you've got all of that information in here to analyze yourself as well if those values didn't seem particularly right to you, and B, you've got the outputs ready to complete the returns that you need to do. Okay, over to you.
Okay. Just before I step into kind of using Excel for potentially internal reporting, just one other thing to note on, say, Power Query is that because it's so step-based, it can in some instances be your first port of call for anything that you think could be RPA related. That you can, by learning Power Query, you can create stages which would traditionally have been done of source data, and then the next tab might be do some formula, and the next tab might be do something else, and you're whittling it down until you finally get your final output. By doing it in this methodology, obviously you click refresh and it reloads based on any changes you made to any of the original source files. So your source files can be live and you're just taking an extract at that given time. And because it is a skill that you can learn, it's Excel based, it means that you're not in a list of RPA to wait for any revisions or for something to be written. You could start it and do it entirely yourselves. Okay, so now stepping into kind of internal reporting, to make things quite easy for myself, I've added a little drop-down list that's for each division. I probably should have added a wildcard or a star, which would have just meant it's all of the above. But I've just lifted and shifted from the actual master list table for the reporting section to say what the breakdown is by target identified and whatnot, and then similarly the same graphs, so that you could lift and shift that into a PDF, any kind of Word document, PowerPoint, whatever. But it's this bit here that I want to draw your attention to, which is looking at the month ahead. which is using the information from the setup tab. So if you wanted to say do the top 10, the most material schemes, the most material whatever, your options are that you do it manually. You take your source data, you filter for the top 10 of that value in, say, month 4, and order them, extract them, order them, and put them into whatever format you think will be visually appeasing. You could do it via a pivot table and then just click refresh and filter for your divisions. You could similarly do it in Power Query and set up a variable. But I like the fact that I just have one drop down that drives everything. So I've done it formulaically as the 4th option. Now, within Excel and nesting formulas, it can get sometimes quite long and arduous and difficult to read. But I just wanted to kind of introduce you to some formulas that you may not be aware of. So an index, a sort, and a filter. And I want to show you what each of those does in turn to hopefully help you understand that process and what they're doing, and potentially just an introduction to array formulas. So starting at the filter, so if I just grab the first bit, I'm just going to parse this out and stick it in its own little cell. So what this is doing is I'm doing a formula that's looking up to my source table, which is called 2425FY. That's the table name. The column, my include, if you will, is where division is equal to my variable, my drop down from before, which was division 1. So if I just hit enter on that, I'm going to get a spill of so much data, and that is everything from the master list that relates to division 1. If I now toggle for division 2, you'll notice that division 2 pops up and drives the next bit. I will note that these are static, so I just copied and pasted across, but they would be formulaically driven normally. So I've now got every single column that's from the master list sorted, not sorted, filtered just for the division 1, which if you're doing it manually, you'd go into it and filter for that division. The next stage down is to get the sort bit of it. So if I just grab that formula, and I'll walk through that as well. So again, I'm using my data from my filter. So all of that table, all of that spill you can see below. I'm sorting, my sort index is column 61, which I could easily write a formula to identify what the column name is or the column number is based on its name. And if your data set moves around a lot and new cells get added, it might be better to use that approach. But as you've seen from the index, it gets quite long anyway. So this for me is a set it and leave it formula. I can set this formula as is, and as long as I maintain the setup tab, no matter if the next month happens, the next year happens, the next decade happens, as long as I maintain that setup, I never have to touch this formula again. So I've chosen to just say it's column 61. I found that in the data. I've selected the start source and all the way to next month field, and the 61 columns there. The next stage is how I'm going to sort it. -1 is highest value to lowest value, and a value of 1 would return the lowest value to the highest value. So for the purpose of a top 10, I want -1, and the final part of this by column I've set as false. I'm not actually using that for the purpose of this. I probably could just delete it. And if I just hit enter on that, I get the same data again, but what you'll now see is that you'll see from the table above it's sorted highest to lowest, and my scheme becomes do something 14, 18, 13, 12, 15, all marries back up to that. So it's now sorted using next month as how I'm sorting it. And then finally, the final part of the puzzle is my index. So what columns I actually want to return. So again, my data set's still the same. I'm not touching that at all. I'm getting this massive spill and wanting the top 1 row. And unfortunately, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10. And then what I've done is I've selected the columns by number. So I've selected column 4, column 5, column 12. Similarly, if I wanted to start with my numbers in any order, I could do column 61 as the first one. It just so happens that for me, they're sequential. But go into the actual data set, which is this one, and just go into the first section. I'm actually dropping these 3 columns. I'm not interested in any of them, and my start point is actually here. And then I'm potentially going to say here and then somewhere else. So just by writing this one formula, I don't have to do it manually. I could have done it in Power Query, I could have done it in a pivot table, but for me, this is just nice and simple, set it and leave it. So just wanted to kind of introduce those kind of things. And that's our session. We will hand over to questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to on top of that, it's one of the things that you mentioned there. You said about spilling. That might be something new to people. Even if you're on Office 365, you may not even have attempted something that would do such a thing like that. But this is a very new-ish, relatively new thing within Excel, to allow a single cell to actually show up in loads of other cells around it, and that aspect of Excel is going to be quite a new thing for the majority of people, even now, and I think that it comes with it some really powerful functions. As Mike said, you could have created this in many different ways, but though this particular way means that you only have to change something once, and then because it's all formula driven, everything changes for you in that instance that you've changed the variable itself. So thank you very much for listening through that. And yeah, as I say, any questions?
Samir, Michael, thank you for that. I'm always blown away by your knowledge on Excel. Makes mine feel rather poor, I think, but no, it just shows, doesn't it? If you think Excel years ago, how it's really advanced over the years, and what you can really do in that, particularly when you think about those power tools. I'll bring in some questions in a second. I've just got a quick question. With reference to the power functions, like Power Query, for example, do we all have facility for that through Excel?
I think, as I said at the start, so it depends on the version of Excel that you've got.
Right.
And by that I mean whether you're on Excel 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019, or 365. I think there's a 2021 or something. I don't know. But yeah, it depends on which version in that respect that you're on. I know that Excel 2010, you need to download the Power Functions. In Excel 2013, I think you need to download Power Pivot, but you've already got Power Query all the way around. And then in Excel 2016, you've got everything. So anything from 2016 onwards, you've got everything. What I will say is that if you were to share something from an Office 365 person to an Excel 2016 person, the actual software version within 365 may come with it some new functionality that the older ones don't. Even in Power Query, there could be some new functions in there that may not work on an older one. So always check on when producing these things that you're producing it for people that it's going to be compatible with.
Sure. No, that's a very good point. Very good point. So just remind us then, the Power Functions, there's Query, Pivot.
There was a Power Map, but I think that
they're the two main ones. Yeah,
I think so.
It's all part of a Power Suite, really, that ties in with Power BI. It'll tie in with other Microsoft products, but namely in Excel, it's probably Power Pivot and Power Query that you'd use. Most likely Power Query.
Okay, that's great. No, thank you for that. Roger had a comment about, were the individual folders separate tabs in the same workbook or different workbooks, please?
Different workbooks entirely. There were 4 different workbooks, all with the same structure for consistency. They all had a master list tab and a reporting tab, for example, and it's just that we've combined it on the master list tab.
Okay, thank you for that. Zishan asked, will you be able to share the template? Presumably you've got some specific data in there, have you?
No, it's all fictitious data, and I'm more than happy to share it. This is hopefully going to be an innovation. It's got a bit more tinkering to do, but it's largely based on something that I built previously that I'm going to revise to make more standardized for any trust to basically have if they want it. And equally, if there's interest, we're more than happy to do an entire showcase on it in detail of every single step.
That's brilliant, guys. No, good stuff. Thank you for that. We've got a question from Adam.
Hiya. With dynamic arrays, you were using the index function to filter out certain columns and rows. I've been using the take and choose columns functions instead. Is there any benefit using one over the other?
No, and we were speaking about this just before this started. Yeah, like it with a lot of the things within Excel, like that's really the most powerful thing is what's happening at the moment. It's loads of new functions and stuff are coming through, and they all provide some level of efficiency in terms of the contents of the formula, how you actually write it yourself to actually get the job done. In that particular example, the index works exactly the same as the choose cols would do. It's just choose cols is a different formula that has been set up to more user-friendly way of doing that job, because the function itself is called what it's supposed to do. Index, you don't really quite get an understanding of what it means just by the fact that it says index. You've got to understand what the formula does and the power of it before you can do that. So by all means, what you're doing with those is brilliant, and yeah, just keep up with the current ones. I guess if you were to share it with somebody who doesn't have those formulas, for instance, because it even differs for 365 users. I don't think that I've got the take one, for instance, potentially, but I might have choose cols or whatever way around it is. Then yeah, that's the only downside is compatibility.
Right. Yeah. Also, I can't wait until group by comes out.
Yeah. So what Adam's describing there is the ability to, within a formula, essentially create a pivot table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that going to be a new feature soon? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. That'll be on your next. That'll be on your next demo, then, will it? maybe.
Yeah, we shall see. Yeah, we haven't really exposed the all of the 365 formulas, just because again we're still very aware that we're not all there yet in terms of our software, and so it's quite difficult to talk about those ones if we're not all on the same software.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Can I just tack on to that? We've not mentioned already, but the part of the basic session, not to deter anybody that's maybe entirely new to Excel and has looked at what we've done and been a little bit scared by it potentially. As part of the basics, we have literally gone back to pretending you don't know Excel, to the point that we've gone through each individual tab on the Excel homepage, if you will. And there was bits that me and Samir had both looked at and been like, oh, I didn't know it did that. I didn't know that formula existed. So we have tried to go back to, this is the core of what we consider essential formulaically for someone to learn, as well as conditional formatting, as well as data validation, things like that. So it is meant to be anyone can access. And as we get towards the more kind of the problems, this is where we kind of focus in on the newer parts of Excel.
Yeah, the actual real life aspects of it and in your day-to-day.
Okay, we've got a question from Samuel.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for the session. I was just When you did set up the connection with the folder, can those connections be, once they're set up, can they be set to automatically update when the workbook they're in is opened? Or do you have to refresh them manually each time? Do you know?
I'm not aware of being able. Sorry, Tom. You'll probably know
Go on.
better than me than this one.
So just to clarify, when you open up one of the source files or when you open up the summary file?
The summary file.
Yeah. So within Excel, you can set different connections or different queries just to refresh on open.
Okay, yep, sure.
And it's just a tick box.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
So we've got a comment or a question from Vanessa in the chat saying, are we able to use the group by function in Power Query?
Yes,
Vanessa
you can.
suggesting we can, yeah.
It wasn't demonstrated, but that's how we aggregated for the PFR data. So it was just the columns we needed rather than having them repeated millions of times. It was just the group by, like you would in the pivot table, a sum of those columns.
Great, okay, thank you for that. Any final questions for Michael?